Hi, I am Rosemary Evans, and I am the principal of University of Toronto Schools. Before working as a principal, I was a long-time teacher of history, and also I was engaged in writing history textbooks. Because when you really love a subject and you really want to have the right material for students to study, I found that the study of history, the teaching of history, and the writing of history for students was a wonderful combined effort. And I had always found in studying history that what really excited me was finding different documents that illustrated various aspects of the past that I wasn't aware of and that added interest to the human story. A very good example is a course that I took here at University of Toronto, studying the experiences of Canadians and in particular involved with war. And I'll never forget the excitement of doing the research for an essay on the experience of Japanese Canadians in Toronto. And so that experience involved me in interviewing people who had been displaced and moved to Toronto. And then in addition, visiting down on Queen Street, up on the third floor of a very old storefront building, the offices of the New Canadian. The New Canadian is a Japanese newspaper, and they had all their original newspapers down in this building. So I spent hours in that building finding documents on the experience of Japanese Canadians who were displaced to Toronto, written about in this newspaper, the New Canadian. And they were first-hand and second-hand accounts. And I found this so engaging, understanding an aspect of World War II that I had never studied. And so I was convinced that when I teach history, this is the type of historical study that I want to engage students in. Well, as you can imagine, the study of history in particular has really shaped my life. It exposed me to the importance of investigation, inquiry, and the arts in particular. They are such an important part of a person's education. It introduces you to the importance of really looking at the human experience and many different humans. For many years, women were left out of the study of history. And one of the seminal experiences I had was working with a group at OISE, and that group was putting together a book called Canadian Women in History. What they discovered in writing that book, and I was working with them, they did not have primary documents. No one had saved the documents of women, or if they were, they had to really search. And so their first task before they could even write the book was actually to go and put together archives, from archives and other sources, the documents of women's experiences in Canada. And so I was on the team that utilized those documents to put into history classrooms. They said, we've got this wealth of material. We need to introduce this material to history teachers and history students so that women's experiences are captured and understood by students, and not simply as victims or as something that is missing, but as contributors and as people who truly made a difference in their societies. Another area that I frequently found myself writing about when I was writing texts was Indigenous history. I was fascinated by the impact and very moved by the impact of residential schools. And interestingly, in Toronto, there are many archival materials on residential schools, both in the church libraries, in the archives, and in Wilbart's library. And so I was able to incorporate into my writing original documents related to the residential school experience and really how horrific it was for youth who were taken away from their families, who were denied their culture, understanding they were no longer allowed to wear the clothing that their parents had sent with them, that they had their hair cut. They had no hope of secondary education past really the grade 9 or 10 level, and of course being subject to abuse, physical and psychological abuse, and the impact of that on their communities. But the documentation that supported that was what the students truly found moving and made a difference for them. To understand the past is so important. Not necessarily that the past necessarily informs the future, but rather it gives you a perspective for viewing the future, a foundation. And it also helps us all to empathize with the multiple points of view and experiences of people today. So if you think of Indigenous Canadians, that residential school experience has rippled through time. And the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was focused on exactly that experience. But history is the route to understanding the truth. And it has to look at the truth again from multiple perspectives and points of view. For students, my recommendation strongly is to go to university and wherever possible, at least take some courses in disciplines that you may not feel are your strength. I think it stretches everyone. When I was studying history, I studied the history of science, but then later I did a Master in Business Administration. And that was an ordeal for me, but it was a great ordeal. I had to take 23 courses. It took me a very long time, but stretching yourself to study something that you haven't been exposed to. I had never studied accounting. I had never studied finance. And these were subjects that I learned were really significant in shaping our world and were engaging. And I think for an engineer or for a computer scientist or a mathematician to study philosophy, to study drama is equally important in making for a human being that has a well-rounded background and can really appreciate the world. I truly love being in schools. I love working with students and with teachers. There are many opportunities where I can work with teachers and try to help them become the educators they really want to be. Every teacher is different and unique. There's no one mold for the successful teacher. Teachers need, though, to be growing, learning, and improving their practice all the time through reflection and through engagement with their students and thinking about what makes a difference for students. And so providing those opportunities are critical. You see with youth that they are curious, that they take risks, they want to understand their world, they want to work together, they want to test independence. They need to do this. In order to mature, they need to make mistakes. They need support of adults. They don't need control, but they need guidance and support as they explore and journey and decide who they want to be as human beings. And so that adult presence, teachers and administrators and parents is critical. But it's guidance and it's oversight as opposed to doing it for them. They need to do it themselves and they need to make mistakes, and that's okay.